north right-of-way line of Liberty Street. So what if the north line of Liberty Street is not north 890515 east? In that case, which one of these two bits of data would control? Well, in this case, under the rule of monumentation, rule of construction, since the north right-of-way line of Liberty Street is a platted street that is identifiable by a surveyor, that would control that angle. So that if the angle is actually north 86 something or something other than north 890515 east, then it can be ignored. And actually you could take that degree info out completely. You could just say thence run north or thence run east along the north right-of-way line of Liberty Street, and that would be enough to complete that call. So that has to do with the angle. Now the rest of that call, go to your next slide here, says a distance of 100 feet to the west line of Lot 4, Green Acres subdivision. Now in this case, again, we have two bits of data to give us the distance. And this kind of reminds me of the old saying about the man with one watch. A man with one watch always knows what time it is, but a man with two watches is never sure. So in this case, when you have two bits of info that might conflict, one has to control over the other. Well, again, in this case, since the west line of Lot 4 of this plat is a locatable by a surveyor line, it will control the distance. So in this case, if the distance is actually 98 feet or 106 feet, you're actually going to go to the west line of 4, and you could eliminate the 100 completely. You could say run east along the north right-of-way line of Liberty Street to the west line of Lot 4, Green Acres subdivision. So in those cases where you find errors in your angles or your distances that are controlled by these monumentations or rule of construction, then you can consider those harmless errors in some cases. Other examples of lines that can be used are section lines, quarter section lines, right-of-way lines, plat lines, things that are locatable for certainty by a surveyor. Now next we want to go to scrivener's affidavits and talk about this a little. We get lots of questions about scrivener's affidavits, so we want to just talk about them a little. We could do a whole webinar on scrivener's affidavits, but we're just going to hit the high points here briefly for you. These are to correct some types of errors in legal descriptions that are not really fatal, but they're not exactly harmless either. These affidavits are sometimes, depending on who signs them, they might be called scrivener's affidavits. The scrivener is the person who drew the instrument, the drafter. Or if the clerk of court, some clerks will still sign these affidavits, some won't anymore, but when so, we call it a clerk's affidavit. Sometimes we get them from a surveyor, or sometimes even a title professional familiar enough with the facts may sign the affidavit. Now these affidavits generally come into play with your simpler legal descriptions where you have, let's say, a lot or a tract in a platted subdivision, or you have a condo unit in a particular condo project. And the concept of the scrivener's affidavit is if the error in the name of the plat or the condo project is reasonably clear or slight enough that no other recorded subdivision or condo project is so similarly worded so as to be confused with it, then you could use a scrivener's affidavit. Or in some cases, if there is a similarly named plat or condominium project, but if that similar named project doesn't have that particular lot or tract in it, then sometimes you can still use a scrivener's affidavit. So we'll give you an example here of where a scrivener's affidavit can be used. When it can be used, it can be executed, like we said, by any one of these various people, the clerk, a surveyor, title professional. The affidavit sets forth the instrument containing the error, describes the error, and then describes the correct description and explains why the error is reasonably clear. Here's an example of one that we want to show you. In this case, we had a conveyance of Unit 6, Building B of Wild Game Condominium, according to the deck recorded in OR 1, page 2, Lee County, Florida. Now, in this case, there was an error. Wild Game Condominium was not the correct name. The correct name was Wild Thing Condominium. And it just so happens that in Lee County, there is no condominium by the name of Wild Game Condominium. So in this case, now we're back to Scott for poll question 3.
Yeah, and everyone's done really well today with these poll questions. So poll question number 3 is, can Safari Scrivener record a Scrivener's affidavit to correct the erroneous name? This is an easy one, either yes or no. You got a 50-50 chance on this one. So go ahead and cast your votes now. We have one clear leader going on here. Let's give it another couple seconds. All right, let's go ahead and close the polls. And Jerry, fire away with that answer.
Drum roll, please. Okay. The answer is yes. In this case, a Scrivener's affidavit can be used to clarify this error in the description. And we'll show you here an example of what such an affidavit might look like. In this case, it was signed by a clerk. So the clerk says here that the correct name of the condominium referred to in that condo book page is Wild Thing Condominium, and there is no declaration called Wild Game Condominium. And they go on to describe the deed that contains the incorrect description, what the correct description is, and so it explains the facts there, as we say. So in that case, no corrective instrument would be required, and we would normally record the clerk's affidavit. Now, moving along to a different subject, if you don't hear anything I say today, listen to this carefully. We have so many problems with this. We've pounded this, and we just can't seem to convince everybody of it. A fatally flawed description cannot be corrected by correcting the description and re-recording the instrument. This is because in such an arrangement, several elements of a valid instrument are lacking. The correction is not executed by the grantor. The witnesses did not witness the correction, and the correction was also not re-acknowledged. There was no new signature to re-acknowledge. So for some reason, we still have cases where people think they can simply take a deed that had an erroneous description, put the correct description on it, re-record it, and go their merry way. You cannot do that. In order to correct an error in a description of this type, a corrective instrument must be re-executed by the grantor with new witnesses and a new acknowledgement to be effective. Okay, now we want to talk about a couple of definitions and their use in legal descriptions. First is the overlap. An overlap is an area of real property where the same lands are included in the descriptions to adjacent owners. And in this example, this isn't really platted lot 1 and 2. This is just like parcel 1 and 2. Let's say these are meets and bounds descriptions. And on your slide there, that little area called the overlap is actually included in both the description to the parcel 2 on the right and the parcel 1 on the left. So in this case, both of these owners' deeds purport to cover that overlap area. Now, when the examiner is aware of an overlap, it cannot be ignored, even if you feel that our property owner has a superior claim. I've heard sometimes examiners say, well, our guy had the deed first, we have superior title, we shouldn't have a problem with this. The recorded instruments are not the only factor to consider in who has title. Plus, we don't want to pay for litigation. So when you have an overlap, you have to get it straightened out. You have to get a quitclaim deed or a boundary line agreement, or you have to be very careful with that. Now, these overlaps are sometimes discovered as a survey review. Those of you who review surveys, sometimes the surveyor points them out. Sometimes it's more subtle, as we'll talk about in a minute. but where you know about an overlap, you need to deal with it.